This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a run through the markets though. So on the last trading day of the week, at least as far as the EGX30 is concerned, the index closed just over 1% higher. So far this week, the NSE 20 has fallen by over 3%. South African indices though are having a rather rough week. The top 14, the all share down by over 2.5% at one point in trading today. That brings their decline so far in the week to about 3.8 and 4.1% respectively. The S&P 500 has fallen for the last two sessions in a row. Will today be any different? We'll find out and update you in the course of the hour. Here's what's coming up tonight. South Sudan becomes the first African nation to restore international travel amidst this coronavirus pandemic. Private companies are now welcome to invest in Uganda's power transmission sector. And Facebook is partnering with major telecommunication companies in a $1 billion high-speed data cable project. All that is in the pipeline for you tonight. But let's start the hour with Africa's youngest country. South Sudan has reopened its airports to local and international flight as the country eases its COVID-19 restrictions. Now, according to the country's civil aviation regulator, passengers and staff will have to follow all the measures that have been put in place to ensure their health is in order. That includes wearing face masks in public areas, social distancing and spraying of all aircraft on arrival. All international travellers will also be required to produce medical certificates from countries of origin, declaring them to be free of COVID-19. They will also have to go into 14-day quarantine upon arrival. Markets, shops and bars have also been allowed to reopen in the country. South Sudan did close all airports and border crossings on the 24th of March in a bid to contain the spread of COVID-19. So then let's get you the latest on this from CGTN's Patrick Oyet. He joins us now live from South Sudan's capital of Juba. So Patrick, I see there's 6 flights scheduled to land tomorrow, another 7 scheduled to take off. Most of this, though, is regional air traffic. But how does it compare to flight traffic before the pandemic hit South Sudan?
Ramah, no, that is a very small number if you look at the air traffic in South Sudan. You know, in South Sudan, people rely mostly on air transport to move even within the country. I can tell you that the 79 counties within the country all have airstrips, and the roads in South Sudan, the road infrastructure is so bad that people have to rely on air transport. So like when the rainy season begins like this, people cannot access most of the villages. Even the humanitarian agencies have to rely on air transport to deliver the goods to the needy. So it's a big thing here, air transport. The airport authorities here say about 70 to 80 flights land in Juba International Airport. So it's a small airport, but of course a very busy one. And then you have those airlines that come like from Uganda, from Kenya. You have Kenya Airways, you have 540, and then you have from Rwanda, you have from Ethiopia that has 3 flights in a day to Juba, and then you have Egypt, you have Fly Dubai. So it's a very busy airport. The 7 taking off and 6 landing in Juba tomorrow is a very small number.
Indeed. So essentially baby steps as far as air traffic is concerned. But the country's reopened its airports to international flights. But once passengers land, where will the country be holding passengers in quarantine? Where's the capacity for that domestically?
Yeah, that's actually one of the challenges, one of the concerns that some people have in this country, because the government is saying that those who will come will have to be quarantined in their own homes, because when you look at the facilities, the health infrastructure in the country is not really developed. Even now that there are cases of COVID-19 in the country, those who are testing positive but they are not asymptomatic are being quarantined in their home. So what the government is doing is that you are supposed to stay in the home. The health officials come and check on you. Then they put security officials to ensure that the quarantine is really enforced, and also provide you with food and water. So they are saying those who will come for the 14-day quarantine, you will have to be at your own home, but there will be security to ensure you follow the rules. They will provide water, they'll provide food so that you follow the rules. So basically that's what the health officials are saying.
Indeed. One last question for you. What is South Sudan's capacity, local testing capacity like? Because if you have all these passengers coming into Juba, surely you can't just rely on other parties saying these guys do not have COVID. How many tests can South Sudan run in a day?
Previously, from the time the first case was announced in South Sudan until on Sunday this week, the government or the health ministry announced that it was carrying 200 tests per day, but they have received more equipment for testing from China, a donation. So they are saying they will be running from 500 to 1,000 tests a day. So they're saying this they see is enough for them to carry enough tests. However, there are also concerns because they have to prioritize some tests. So like for example, there are 8 agencies that would like to move their staffs to the rural areas to provide services. So these will have to be given priorities. Pilots that fly planes have to be given priorities. So even if there are 1,000 people lined to be tested in a day, when such emergencies arise, and also those people who, for example, are already showing some symptoms of coronavirus, they also have to be prioritized. So yeah, they're saying between 500 to 1,000 tests could be carried out within a day. They also say they have now opened the laboratory to work 24/7. The workers are now in shifts. So they believe that this will be okay. And also they are concerned about the economy because if rainy season now is in place, people are not able to move to the villages. Even traders cannot move goods to the villages because there is no air transport. So that is really difficult for the people here.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Patrick Oyet's there in Juba. Thank you. Now, aviation has played a pivotal role in supporting growth and stimulating economic development across Africa. But the once vibrant industry is now essentially on its knees, and that, frankly, is putting it mildly. Tropic Air, based in the town of Nanyuki, some 200 kilometers northeast of the Kenyan capital, is among the local carriers here in Kenya that's been battered by this pandemic. CGTN's Nick Mudimba now explores how it's coping.
It's one of the busiest airfields in the country due to its strategic location near tourist attraction sites like Mount Kenya, Olpejeta Conservancy and many others. But the view here shows these are unusual times. Grass now literally taking over the runway surface, the windsock showing the uncertain direction of change. Indigenous birds no longer worried about the unsettling noise from the planes. And no sounds of aircraft engines making this airfield a ghost facility. Different types of planes have been parked as the global pandemic grounded the aviation sector here. Tropic Air, which is among the leading air leasing and transport companies that has an East African footprint, is indeed going through a tough patch.
We are really suffering. We have a lot of people who have lost their jobs in the name of following. A lot of people are not earning anything. Salary cuts, we're talking about 50% salary cuts, others 25% cuts, no flights at all.
With no aircraft flying, some companies have opted to forgo insurance policies for planes to cut on costs. The hangar is busy. Many of the planes are undergoing maintenance.
Right now, because we have no flying, we are doing maintenance before the coronavirus ends for the season. After the coronavirus has come to an end, we are expecting a very busy flying season.
At the office, the doors are locked with no staff in sight.
After we open our borders, after we think everything is back to normal, there'll be still serious travel restrictions. Who wants to expose their kids to coronavirus even if there is a vaccine?
For the planes which aren't airborne, the lack of flying remains costly to the company. So this plane is known as a Cessna Grand Caravan. It's been parked here for more than 2.5 months. Now, when you talk about technical issues, it operates under 25.3 volts on a good day. That's a busy day. right now is actually doing 24.1 volts, meaning the plane hasn't been so busy and that it will need a boost for them to start. And that, again, is totally another ballgame. For the support staff, adjusting is the norm.
We must have to survive with the pay cuts. That's all I can say.
We bumped into Nicholas Cedron, a private pilot who uses the airstrip frequently. His story wasn't different. Jet fuel prices haven't gone down.
Actually, the prices seem to have increased since. Now, I don't fly all the time. So when I filled up in February, they were definitely more expensive now. It was 10 cents more per liter than it was in February. But I would expect that that's going to come down shortly. I just haven't seen it yet.
Indeed, special times we are living in, but again, engineers and technicians are getting set for a new dawn. A dawn that indeed they're hopeful that returns will be back to factory settings. This is not for the faint-hearted. They're here hopeful that indeed the birds will be up again and flying. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nanyuki, Kenya.
All right, then away from aviation, East African economies are expected to contract fairly sharply as a result of this pandemic. A brief report from Deloitte released earlier this week reviews some of the expected changes. In East Africa, Kenya's projected growth in 2020 has been sharply revised down to barely 1% from an earlier forecast of 5.7%. Steep declines in tourism activity, export revenues and disruptions in several supply chains, horticulture certainly does come to mind, are being seen there. Ethiopia is expected to grapple with high levels of unemployment. Its GDP growth forecast has been cut to just 3.2% from 6.2%. Now, the outlooks for Tanzania and Uganda show a pretty similar trend, with their 2020 growth forecast being revised down to 2% and 3.5%. respectively. Tanzania, in fact, is actually showing waning demand for mineral exports given global supply chain disruptions and, of course, a decline in consumer demand. There's a lot to dig into, so let's explore the details of the economic damage being inflicted across East Africa by this pandemic. Tewodros Sisse is an Associate Director in Deloitte East Africa's Financial Advisory Unit. He joins me now live on the line. Tewodros, good to see you. So it's still relatively early in trying to understand how this pandemic may play out, especially in frontier economies like ours. But what are you broadly expecting to see in terms of average income levels and formal sector employment?
Thanks for having me as well on this show. So as you mentioned, Kenya's GDP grew by 5.4% in 2019. And then we are expecting it to go by 5.7 in 2020 as well. But that now is revised to barely 1%. This is mainly to do with a significant decline in export revenue, which declined by close to $1.5 billion, and also a decline in tourism and travel industry, where 1.5 million jobs is now at risk. And then you'll see a collapse in the aviation sector as well, where one aviation job actually supports 24 jobs in the wider economy. So having said this, from wider economy perspective, if we look at the job market in Kenya, of course, COVID-19 pandemic is going to significantly change this. If you look into the average earnings in 2019, it was close to 780,000 Kenyan shilling, which was up from Kenyan shilling 719,000. So due to all this impacts now, the hiring freeze by companies in the formal sector, where 17% of the Kenyan population is being currently hired. So we're expecting to see average earnings to decline to almost 370,000 Kenyan shilling. This is almost below 50% of what we have seen in 2019. So there will be a significant decline in average earnings in Kenya.
Indeed. So the other thing about the Kenyan job market, using this as a proxy essentially in East Africa in this conversation, is the fact that the rate of job creation has been slowing down over the last 5 years. But given the near complete standstill that we've seen in tourism and aviation, might 2020 be the year when the job creation rate essentially hits zero, at least in the formal sector?
I mean, it's a very difficult time to have an absolute number on any projections right now. But I can tell you for sure, given the hiring freezes that we have seen across different industries, the employment job creation is going to be very, very low. Maybe just to give you a perspective, if you look at, and as you mentioned it as well, in the past 5 years, job creation has been on the decline. So if you look at 2018, for example, the formal sector only created 78,000 jobs, which is a 6-year low for Kenya. But that figure grew to close to 107,000 in 2019. This is specifically for in the formal sector. So, but now looking at the companies, everyone is trying to have a lean staff and reduce their costs as much as possible. So this is going to have a significant impact in job creation. So we'll see a significant decline in the job creation in the formal sector within Kenya. So this is our expectation from projection perspective, but we won't see what we have seen in the last 5 years. It would be much lower than what we have seen in the last 5 years.
Indeed. So the damage, at least on the agricultural side, from this pandemic has been limited to commercial agriculture, particularly the export-facing sectors, flowers, cut vegetables, mostly exported into the EU, for example. But to what extent might this COVID-19 crisis, plus the ongoing floods, plus the desert locust invasion, to what extent might all of these combine to affect domestic food supplies?
I mean, that's a very good question. If you look at it from COVID pandemic perspective, of course, the impact has been on export earnings. But the biggest challenge for Kenya and the rest of the East African countries is the locust invasion. The agriculture sector was expected to grow at least with 2019 growth rate, which is around 4.1%. Now that sector is expected to grow barely by 0.9%. This is mainly because of the locust invasion. And then I don't know if you have seen the reports by the United Nations around January, where they indicated Horn of African countries will have a loss of 110,000 hectares of agricultural land because of locust invasion. And then that revised report, now if you look at it in March, within 3 months' time, that increased to 190,000 hectares. Maybe just to give a perspective on what the damage looks like is an average locust consumes its body weight. And if you look at what has been happening in East Africa, is there has been close to 40-50 million locusts swarming around. So I mean, this having 40 million locusts in one area is almost losing equivalent of a food for 35,000 people. Due to this, now even the UN report is saying close to more than 3 million people will have food security issues. So the biggest challenge is now coming through the locust invasion, plus now the flood damage, as well as now from the export decline from COVID-19 pandemic.
Indeed. So we've essentially covered some of the key issues here. But what about the tax side of this conversation? Because as you mentioned a little earlier, job creation rate will definitely slow down. Companies are not spending as much. Consumers also not spending as much. And Kenya's provided some tax exemptions. You know, we've cut the top tax rate for companies and individual income. We've also reduced the VAT rate. We've knocked 200 basis points off there. But is there further room to cut taxes, or should we in fact be preparing for tax hikes in order to reduce the revenue losses through exemptions?
I mean, the Kenyan government took significant measures, I mean, from the fiscal perspective, monetary policy perspective, to combat, I mean, the effect of COVID-19 in the country. From our side, we don't expect any more tax cuts, given that the government is now losing close to $680 million in lost revenue because of these cuts. So we don't expect any more cuts to come in. However, we expect the government to support the different industries, more specifically the companies that has been hit significantly by the COVID, the pandemic, maybe through cash injections, and then as KRA is currently doing, fast-tracking VAT refunds to the companies would give them at least a bit of liquidity. And then now, if you look at it from fiscal deficit perspective, the fiscal deficit in Kenya increased from 7% in 2019 to 8% in 2020. So we don't really expect any more cuts, and then we don't think there is any other room. So this is basically in light of the growing deficits. However, now once the pandemic is reducing, the impact is reducing, the government is going to increase tax rate, and then we also expect a VAT being applied to more broad range of products. That will mean now an increase in prices for the consumer. And then we expect KRA to be more aggressive as well in terms of tax collections in the coming months. And then they will spend more time reviewing companies as well.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. We're running out of time there. Tawadros Sisse from Deloitte East Africa, thank you very much for your time this evening. Time now for a run through some company headlines. All right, and let's get back to aviation. Administrators at the state-owned carrier South African Airways will not sell assets for an interim period without involving government. According to a memorandum signed by one of the administrators and the Public Enterprises Ministry, both sides agreed that the objective of SAA's bankruptcy protection process was to restructure the airline or have a new company set up with no reliance on public money. Senior officials have criticised the administrators for not coming up with a business rescue plan for one of Africa's largest airlines. Still in South Africa, the telco Vodacom has posted significantly better performance compared to her sub-Saharan African peers during the course of this pandemic. Between March and May, Vodacom customers increased data consumption, and that in fact did offset the impact of lowered data prices, which were implemented from March. Mobile operators in Kenya, Ghana and Nigeria have also recorded increased data consumption, but the companies reported a significant decline in voice revenue. Speaking of Kenya, the High Court here has thrown out a case against Safaricom, in which it was accused of infringing ownership of an emergency airtime service provided to distressed subscribers. Now, the two plaintiffs in the case accused Safaricom of profiting off their 2006 proposal to extend emergency credit to subscribers, obviously to be paid back later. Safaricom lawyers, however, told the court that the firm had the idea well before it got similar proposals from the plaintiffs. The service was eventually rolled out in 2009. And finally, shares in the food delivery firm Grubhub fell by as much as 9% today after CNBC reported that talks on a potential takeover by Uber could end in days if both sides don't agree to a deal. Uber has offered to acquire Grubhub in an all-share deal, and both parties are still haggling over the price. Grubhub has a market cap of about $5 billion. It's reported to be seeking a ratio of 2.15 Uber shares for each one of its own in negotiations. That's a run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up shortly. Private companies are now welcome to invest in Uganda's power transmission sector. And nearly half of Somalia's population is affected as foreign remittances are dropping in the Horn of Africa country.
About to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Uganda's government is preparing to do something interesting in its electricity sector. It's preparing to open up the electricity transmission side of the business to private capital. Authorities in East Africa's leading coffee producer say that the sector needs at least $2.5 billion in fresh capital over the next 7 years. Uganda's installed generation capacity is expected to jump by 55% to about 1,800 megawatts. That latest addition to the grid is a 600 megawatt power plant that's due to come online sometime later in the year. Still in Uganda, at a time when movement is sharply restricted in order to curb the spread of COVID-19, finding consumers has never been harder for some vendors. Now, in order to help tackle that problem, the United Nations Development Programme has partnered with the e-commerce firm Jumia to set up an online platform that will enable SMEs to connect with clients online. CGTN's Michael Baleke has all the details.
Joyce Kisachi sells fruits and vegetables at Nakasero Market in the heart of Uganda's capital, Kampala. Since the coronavirus lockdown was announced, she's seen her sales drop dramatically.
The situation has not been good because there is no transport. Both public and private cars are not allowed on the road, so the customers are very few and people are reluctant to walk long distances. So we have suffered losses because we deal in perishable products.
Joyce is one of hundreds of vendors across the country the UN is now supporting to sell their agricultural products online via an online platform set up in conjunction with e-commerce company Jumia Foods, which allows market traders to reach both consumers and rural farmers that they've been cut off from due to the coronavirus.
Both the vendor and the buyer will find it easy to use the vendor app, and it will offer the consumers a convenient stay home and shop service.
1 piece of broccoli.
Customers place orders on an app. Jumia then contacts the market traders who select and pack the products before they are picked up and delivered to the consumer safely without any contact. The vendors here work with market agents who confirm and determine that before any food consignment is dispatched, it must meet the right standards in terms of quality, hygiene, and is securely packed. The UN claims connecting market vendors with the digital economy in this way will help provide direct and indirect employment, create opportunities for young innovators, and improve distribution systems for agricultural produce amid the ongoing coronavirus crisis.
It is now clear from all projections that beyond the health crisis, COVID-19 presents with us an opportunity to do our work differently. And indeed, new ways are emerging and will become the new normal.
Like many other countries, Uganda's economy has been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. While this new initiative might not save everyone from having to shut up shop, it's helping to keep people like Joyce in business. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now, domestic fuel subsidies in Africa's largest oil producer have long been deeply contentious issues. They cost the country billions of dollars every single year. Previous attempts by the government to remove them have run into extremely fierce resistance and labour strikes as well. But remember, global oil prices have fallen by over 50% so far this year. So the authorities in Abuja think this is the perfect time to get rid of these subsidies. As CGTN's Sajid Badmus explains, however, this is just the start of a long reform process.
The move to scrap fuel subsidies is a big gamble by the government, but one it is hoping might work out eventually without any blowback. Experts though say the policy is fundamentally flawed and could be defeated if the government doesn't embark on full deregulation of the country's downstream petroleum sector.
This is the most auspicious time for the government to deregulate, because if they deregulate, the price of petroleum products or price of PMS, that is premium motor spirit, will come below what it is today. And when international prices begin to go up, the citizens will realize that this is a deregulated product and the government does not need to fix the price. And so if they have to pay more to buy fuel at the pump head, they will accept it. But if that does not happen until the price of crude start to go up again, the government will find it difficult to remove the subsidy, or we find it difficult to deregulate.
There are three components to fuel subsidy. There is the under recovery, which is what I think they have removed. There's another component to do with FX subsidy because they get foreign exchange at a lower rate than you would get in the exporter and investors window. And then there's a third component to do with taxes. So taxes such as VAT by law are applicable on petrol and other petroleum products, but they haven't been charged. They've been suspended for years. That's also a form of subsidy. Before you start adjusting the price of pump price to something else, you need to make sure that all those free subsidies are removed. And if you do that, that can easily add about 2 trillion to government revenue.
Indeed, completely removing the subsidy would save the country billions of dollars it could put to better use elsewhere in the economy. The petrol subsidy is a very sensitive political issue in Africa's largest oil producer.
If you deregulate that downstream today, in less than 2 years, the price of petrol can go as high as 500 naira per liter. But if we were to be refining locally, if prices of crude oil go up, that quantity we have that we will refine locally, we will sell them here and make good money. Then the other one we export, we make good money.
So far, there hasn't been any complaint about the new policy of the government from the usual quarters, the labor unions. And part of that could be because the current price of petrol is lower than what it was selling before. But things may change when the global price of crude rebounds, as that would certainly push domestic petrol prices up. So it's actually still early days to tell if the government has really done away with the country's controversial subsidy for good. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos.
Now, remittances are a major source of capital inflows for developing economies around the world. Just last year, for example, total global remittance flows exceeded $550 billion. That was an entirely new record. But obviously, this COVID-19 pandemic has other ideas. It's actually forecast to trigger the sharpest fall in remittance flows in recent history, worse even than 2008, as economic activity and travel essentially grinds to a halt. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Pillay now explores how this pandemic has affected nearly 40% of Somali's population who rely on remittances to survive.
At this sprawling neighborhood in downtown Mogadishu, it's business as usual. Remittance companies have opened their doors to allow families to receive financial support sent by their relatives living abroad. However, despite having one of the region's highest coronavirus infections, remittance companies locally known as hawalas remain operational, allowing millions to access funds critical to their survival. But there are concerns that the global emergency will affect the flow of cash that is a lifeline to many.
Over half of the money that we used to receive from abroad has been reduced because these Somalis, those who are living in Europe or USA, or any Somali expatriate who is outside Somalia, was not able to send money.
World Bank estimates that $1.4 to $2 billion is sent back to Somalia annually by expatriates living mainly in the US and Europe, funds that support more than 40% of the country's total population.
Because of these problems and the lockdown imposed by the government, so many Somalis were unable to send money to Somalia, to their families in Somalia. So we can say that COVID-19 is having or causing huge disruptions to the remittance industry.
Across the globe, thousands have died from the infectious disease that has forced governments to take drastic actions, including total lockdowns, flight restrictions, and cessation of movement in some countries. Research indicates that Somalis living abroad are dying from COVID-19 at an alarming rate. Analysts attribute it to low income, poor living conditions, and cultural practices.
A large number of Somali families entirely depend on the remittance industry. Because of the lockdown and because of the lack of remittance companies operating for the last 3 months, definitely these families will suffer a lot, as they will have difficulties in paying the school fees, paying the rent, and even they will not be able to manage to buy food and whatever they need, including the essential goodies.
Somalia has more than 1,000 confirmed cases of the coronavirus and more than 50 fatalities. Public places including mosques remain open as worshippers observe the holy month of Ramadan. The month-long fasting period culminates with Eid al-Fitr, also called as the Festival of Breaking the Fast, a religious holiday celebrated by Muslims worldwide that marks the end of the month-long dawn-to-dusk fasting of Ramadan. And with no sign of a possible vaccine or treatment, many will have to abandon this year's festivities, with experts predicting a shortage in critical cash flows. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
A team of Chinese medical experts has landed in Algeria to help the North African country deal with COVID-19 over there. During their 15-day stay, these experts will share a range of experiences in dealing with COVID-19 with their Algerian counterparts. The medical team of 20 individuals specializes in a broad range of areas, everything from respiratory ailments, intensive care, infectious diseases, and even traditional Chinese medicine. South African Breweries, in the meantime, has reached an agreement with the government to transport its vast unsold inventory backlog of alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages to depots. Just last week, SAB Miller hit, SAB rather, not SAB Miller as it was formerly known, it hit the headlines when it announced its intent to destroy 400 million bottles of beer. The company has been unable to clear its inventory due to the COVID-19 lockdown, which is currently restricting the liquor industry from operating. From Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with the details.
After marathon meetings, South African Breweries finally reached an agreement with the government to start moving its liquor stockpiles. The brewery currently has around 130 million litres of beer sitting in tanks. All liquor sales are banned under the lockdown in South Africa.
In South Africa, we have a very well-defined distribution system whereby the beer gets dropped off at various depots, and from there it gets into what's called runners, and these guys take them into the townships particularly. It's very complicated. Now SAB has got the situation where all the stock that it made prior to lockdown is now rapidly reaching its best buy date. In other words, it's reaching the date by which it is no longer fit for human consumption.
The South African liquor industry was set to contribute more than $1.3 billion to the local economy by the end of the 2019-2020 financial year. But all liquor trade was halted in March. SAB says it might have to retrench 2,000 workers.
We have more than 784 members of FAO that are affected by the retrenchment at SAB that have received notices to serve until the end of May.
SAB is unable to operate and says it's losing millions of dollars every day. While the whole world is struggling to contain the spread of COVID-19, only a handful of countries have banned the sale of liquor and tobacco.
This is one of the few countries in the world that's applied such a prohibition on a wider scale.
SAB says the agreement it has with government will allow it to move its beer between its manufacturing plants and its depots. This means that it won't have to destroy any of the beer that it has. It's a win for government too, as this agreement will ensure that SAB pays over $27 million in taxes. It may still be a while though before consumers can get their hands on a cold beer. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
It's time for another break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up. Facebook is partnering with major African telecommunications companies in a $1 billion high-speed undersea data cable. And we'll explore Ford plans to get back to business as the US economy gradually reopens amidst this pandemic.
Again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time. Now, what is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Welcome back. Let's jump into the world of telecommunications. Facebook and some of the world's largest telecommunications companies are joining forces to build an undersea cable to supply data to a range of countries. 16 of those are right here in Africa. Now, the near $1 billion project will link Europe, the Middle East, and those 16 African countries at 21 different landing sites pretty much across the continent. The undersea cable is expected to be operational somewhere between 2023 and 2024. Facebook has long tried to lead the race to improve connectivity in Africa. The American tech firm attempted to launch a data communication satellite back in 2016, but the SpaceX rocket that was carrying it blew up on the launch pad. All right then, so this is clearly a pretty ambitious idea. Let's see exactly what Facebook is getting out of it. Sarah Walton joins us now live from the United States with more data on this story. So Sarah, Facebook, in its reporting of its results, it doesn't even break out data on users in Africa in its numbers. It simply groups us as under the rest of the world, so with Latin America and the Middle East. So why make this investment? What is in it for Facebook?
Well, Facebook primarily makes its money from selling advertising space on its website. And to make money from that, you need as many people as possible to see those adverts. And that is why Africa is such a tempting prospective market for Facebook. 1.3 billion people and a really young population, just the kind of people that engage with social media. But you need a good internet connection to be able to do that. And Facebook is not by no means the only tech giant interested in tapping into Africa's market. Twitter had said that it was thinking of expanding into Africa, although that may be being reconsidered because of the COVID-19 outbreak. And Google also has said that it has plans for its own subsea internet cable for Africa. I mean, a less cynical way of looking at this is that Facebook also says that it sees itself as having a role in philanthropy and developing technology in Africa for the good of the people of Africa. And we actually had a statement from Facebook when they announced this cable project saying that we have seen firsthand the impact increased connectivity has on communities, from education to healthcare. We know economies flourish when there's widely accessible internet for businesses. So they say this project, this cable, will support Africa's digital economy.
Indeed, certainly there will be quite a few raised eyebrows when Facebook frames this as a philanthropic effort. But it is also making this investment alongside China Mobile, among other telecommunications companies. But might the involvement of a Chinese telecommunications firm, might that be a lightning rod for critics of the company on Capitol Hill?
As you say, that there's a number of companies Facebook's going to be working with on this from all over the world. But yes, one of them is China Mobile. And, you know, we have already seen in the United States, President Donald Trump banned US companies from working with a different Chinese tech company, Huawei. The president said there was national security concerns, although Huawei has always strenuously denied all the allegations against it. You know, and during this coronavirus pandemic, President Donald Trump's been very vocal in his criticism of China's handling of the outbreak. But there are political experts here that say that tact from the president is not exactly a surprise. It's an election year here, and President Trump is coming under a lot of criticism for his handling of the outbreak. And we saw during the last presidential election that his tough on China policy was something that was very popular with his supporters. Having said that, there's been no remarks from the White House on this announcement of this project with Facebook. We'll wait and see if the president makes a comment.
Indeed. One last question for you. So Facebook also did lose a satellite, as mentioned a bit earlier back in 2016. Payload on a SpaceX rocket blew up on the launch pad, and that aimed to provide internet access to underserved parts of the world. But is the firm still interested in investing in satellite internet access, or is that plan entirely on hold?
Well, you mentioned that explosion several years ago. It did set the company back, but it appears they are still very keen in pursuing, development of satellite technology. There were some public filings from Facebook earlier this year that seemed to suggest that they were hoping to launch another satellite using a different commercial rocket launcher. Thought that was going to happen in March, actually, but there's been no word as to whether that went ahead. It may be that, like many things at the moment, the coronavirus outbreak has meant that had to be delayed. But away from satellite, actually, Facebook's also shown some interest in drone technology and potentially using solar-powered drones to beam wireless internet to remote parts of the world. It was reported, actually, that technology was being tested in Australia. So, that plus the announcement of this undersea cable, it seems that Facebook is actually still keen on developing technology on several fronts, all with the aim of potentially increasing internet connectivity across the world.
Indeed, 2020, when we're actually referring to Facebook not just as a social media company, but also as a utility. Sarah Walton in the United States. Thank you. Now, Ford plans to resume production and operations in North America, taking a phased approach to its restart. The carmaker will stagger the return of about 12,000 location-dependent employees who are currently unable to work remotely. CGTN's Mohammed Abubakar takes up that story.
Last week, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer reopened manufacturing, including the big three automakers, and the likes of Kyle Leonard are ready for it.
I feel more safer here at work than I do going out in general public right now, and I'm ready for it all to come back to the normal.
I think people have adjusted real well to it. Come in, put your mask on, put your glasses on or a face shield, get right to work.
Ford plans to resume operations and production using a phased approach amid the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. According to the automaker, most two-shift plants will reopen with one shift, and one-shift plants will operate as normal. Workers whose jobs can't be done remotely, such as vehicle testers and designers, will start returning to work starting May 18th. That includes about 12,000 workers in North America.
So we've been picking up the phone and we've been calling our workers and explaining what life is going to now be like when you come into work, because life is completely different than it was in March. And we all have to get used to that.
Of course, the reopening plan will be executed with safety protocols. The United Auto Workers say at least 25 employees at auto facilities represented by the union have died as a result of this pandemic, although it's not known if they were infected at work.
When you walk into the facility, especially the first day in that first week, we're going to have to be mindful that we have to really touch base with folks several times during the course of the day.
After its plants were shut, Ford announced it would produce personal protective equipment and other supplies for healthcare workers to combat COVID-19. So far, the company says it has produced more than 400,000 reusable surgical gowns manufactured from materials used to make airbags and other durable fabrics. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
European authorities say they will introduce a phased and coordinated approach on how to resume the freedom of movement across member countries. Now, the EU's internal borders could be lifted in areas least affected by COVID-19 with health checks at entry points. CGTN's Lucy Howe has the details from Brussels.
At this time of year, Europe's beaches, museums and piazzas would be starting to fill up. Bars and restaurants would be gearing up to their busiest and most lucrative period. But this year, holidays are on hold. International travellers from outside the EU have been barred. Even EU residents have been unable to travel to neighbouring countries. The European Commission has unveiled plans on how it aims to reboot Europe's embattled travel sector.
This is the first fundamental principles of the packages that we present today. Safety. That underlies our guidance. And that means taking gradual, careful steps to help travel restart in line with what science tells us.
The World Tourism Organization expects losses of 280 to 420 billion euros for the industry this year. With the EU pushing for a reboot, it's unveiled a two-step approach to reopening borders for countries facing similar risk. Europe's Disease Control Agency will be drafted in to monitor areas with low circulation of the virus, dubbed green zones. Travellers within these zones could move freely, provided social distancing measures are followed. This way, blanket quarantine measures can be scrapped. The second phase would see normal travel within the Schengen zone, which allows border-free travel between the majority of EU countries. But there's great uncertainty about when these plans could be put in place.
I think the policy of having travel bubbles within the European Union is probably quite legitimate and a reasonable way to start up travel. I think every country is saying we'll begin with local travel, then regional, and then international travel. People are a lot more tentative about.
Some regional agreements have already been made. Several Baltic countries in the east of the bloc are forming a travel cluster, which would allow freedom of movement between countries like Latvia and Estonia, which have largely been so far unaffected by COVID-19. And the UK and France have agreed a deal to allow freedom of movement without a mandatory 14-day quarantine. The EU desperately wants to revive the upcoming peak holiday season, worth some €150 billion, as the bloc faces its deepest ever recession. But it will be months before normal travel resumes, a severe blow for countries in the south of the bloc, like Italy, Spain and Greece, which are heavily dependent on tourism. Lucy Hoff, CGTN, Brussels.
Now, the COVID-19 pandemic notwithstanding, China is doubling down on the rollout of commercial 5G networks across the country. CGTN's Meng Sheng caught up with TD Tech. It's a 15-year-old joint venture between Nokia and Huawei to explore the industrial applications on What's Hot tonight.
On April the 30th, China launched the world's highest 5G base stations on Mount Kamalama. Signals are now available along the northern slope of the mountain, including its peak. TD Tech joined that initiative by providing terminals known as Customer Premises Equipment, or CPE, for 5G networks. The equipment is able to convert signals into access points, providing wireless services for industrial users. We checked it out at one of the company's R&D centers in southwest China's Chengdu city.
Most of our products are industry class, designed specifically for our clients from different sectors. For an environment such as on Mount Kamalama, average civilian use terminals will not work. Only our professional terminals can meet the requirements of such a harsh environment.
TD Tech is a joint venture between Nokia Networks and Huawei Technologies. The company has come up with wireless technologies in areas ranging from smart transportation to public security. By the end of this year, China aims to build and operate at least 600,000 5G base stations across the country. It will greatly enhance the current communication system, providing new solutions to industries and improving work efficiency, and are high on the list of benefits from the growing 5G infrastructure. At this steel plant in central China's Hunan province, smart manufacturing allows workers to monitor the production process from a remote position. The automated overhead cranes have greatly improved workplace safety and manufacturing performance. At the Ningbo Zhoushan port in eastern China's Zhejiang province, TD Tech's private network solution helps port users improve their command and dispatch efficiency.
Data synthesis creates great value for our clients. The higher the level of its sophistication, the greater the value is. In this era of big data, we need to get used to handling massive, diversified, multidimensional data. Our goal is to develop with our partners an open platform where all kinds of data can meet and be synthesized to create value and synergy for our clients.
The company has worked with over 50 rail lines across China, applying its smart rail transit solutions to the urban railway market.
Our products and solutions have been applied in 150 countries and regions for more than 500 enterprise clients or other proprietary use clients, and this is only the beginning. I believe the coming of 5G technologies will bring it to an even higher level with immeasurable value.
Next-generation 5G networks promise fast data transfer speeds with minimum delay, enabling a wide range of futuristic applications. Catering to that trend, the company has rolled out a diverse range of product terminals to serve industrial users. And like other players, it has its sights set on a bigger market in this key technological battleground. 孟庆生 CGTN 成都 Sichuan Province.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So let's focus on oil at this particular point in time. Supply side cuts do continue at a rather interesting pace. OPEC, in fact, did trim its forecast for oil demand in this quarter by about 15%. That's roughly 3 million or so barrels a day of demand, essentially going completely offline as restrictions continue to cut into demand. We're not flying or driving as much as we used to, remember. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and the UAE, they're also cutting output even further beyond the agreed to deal that they had. The Saudis alone taking off about 1 million barrels of crude a day. So the head of the IEA says that he thinks that the worst of the demand destruction is behind us. But, and this is a key part, he says, but huge uncertainties still remain. Here's what's coming up next. A South African chef launches an e-book on meals made in isolation. That story is coming up shortly. Welcome back. A chef in Cape Town, South Africa has launched a cookbook that was inspired by meals he created during his time in isolation. Jason Whitehead's latest collection of recipes isn't just a culinary ode to creative home cooking, but also a diary of his journey through the country's 7-week lockdown. CGTN's Travis Andrews has that story on Grassroots.
South Africa's lockdown may have caused frustration for many people, but it's also become a creative outlet for some, especially when it comes to sharpening up their culinary skills. That includes chef and author Jason Whitehead, who was confined during lockdown as the country dealt with the COVID-19 outbreak. He, though, chose to be socially constructive with his time by creating a lockdown e-cookbook.
As all of us in South Africa that were put onto lockdown, I was trying to think of ways to keep myself busy, and I started documenting every day how I was feeling, stating the COVID stats, with the whole idea of being a chef in quarantine in South Africa so that people could understand what it was like in a different country. I obviously had to eat, and I decided to then document all of the meals that I made, did the recipes, and kind of joined the two together.
It is, though, all in aid of a good cause, and the book was created in order to raise funds for Streetscapes, an NGO that assists the homeless and those caught up in the criminal justice system through creating work opportunities in community gardens. Proceeds of the cookbook are being channeled to assist their work.
It's 100% of that money goes directly to the beneficiary, so none of it even stays with us. So we're trying to create more opportunities, and that opportunity doesn't just include your work opportunity, it's also a place to stay and all the psychosocial support that you need.
The chef may be known for his French cooking at his bistro in Cape Town's foreshore, but he now spends quite a lot of time tending to his other passion, charitable work. Now, the lockdown cookbook may be inspired by traditional South African dishes, but they are meals that can be cooked just about anywhere in the world.
There's a lot of South African dishes, like one of them is a babuti, which is it's more Cape Malay actually, so it's quite unique to South Africa. Anybody can buy it from anywhere around the world.
The book costs just over $6 and can be bought online. And even though the lockdown still may be in effect in many countries across the world, there's certainly no reason not to indulge in some fine dining inspired meals from the comfort of one's home. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
All right, then a run through the currencies as we wrap up the program for the hour. So the run of gains that we saw in the Kenyan shilling against American dollar in the last couple of weeks, that came to a screeching halt today. It did hit, of course, a record low close to 107.3 at the end of April. Today, it went back over the 106 level. At that level, it's actually close to about 5% weaker to the greenback. The next rate-setting meeting for the East African economy, in fact, is taking place in another week or so. Bitcoin continuing to post gains against the American dollar, up by over 4.8% to about $9,700. Year-to-date gains on that cryptocurrency, over 35 It's a fairly interesting story that currency is telling us. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour or so. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The news continues on CGTN.